My name is Adrian Durkin. I'm an outreach officer at Dudley Museum Service. This is one of a series of talks about paintings owned by Dudley MBC. Impressions of Dudley. By the year 1841, the term Black Country was already in use, and let us face it, in this context, the term is not highly complimentary. However, in life it is rare that things are as black as they are painted, and this is true of Dudley. This first illustration of Dudley is an engraving taken from the work of John Turner. Because it is an engraving, it is designed to be printed and to be printed in black and white. This inevitably means that it's a monotone view and tends to reinforce our stereotypical view of Dudley at the heart of the Black Country. However, what we find is that the blackness of the area is very much in the eye of the beholder, and other artists have tended to see a much greener black country than the engraver of this work. View of Dudley from Burnt Tree by Paul Braddon. What a contrast to the last view is this one of Dudley Castle by the artist Paul Braddon. There is not a trace of the heavy industrialisation that we associate with Dudley, and yet it's painted from Burnt Tree, which is similar to the view used in part by Turner. So we have to ask, why are the two views so different? We can perhaps speculate that the Braddon picture predates the Turner and shows the idyllic country view which would have been prevalent before the Industrial Revolution. But we would be wrong. In fact, Turner is earlier, much earlier. The fact is that Braddon was an artist of splendid imagination. You only have to look at his view of a flooded Dudley Castle with associated gondola to realise that. Braddon was, in fact, working at the start of the 20th century, but he just chose to paint views that he saw in his mind's eye and not the views that were actually there. Sometimes he even predates his work. We have one dated to 1790, quite an achievement when you realise that another is dated 1904. The fact is that artists do not have to be governed by reality, and this artistic licence sometimes makes it difficult to use artistic representations for an objective study of landscape. A View of Dudley by John Blackham, painted 1879 to 1880. One of the ways in which we can get round the problem of artistic licence is by finding more than one source for pictures which back each other up. We are fortunate to have two pictures of Dudley in around 1880, which are not only of similar date but also similar views. The first of these is this oil painting by John Blackham, which shows a view of Dudley painted from somewhere in the region of the Wren's Nest Hill. It is interesting because we know from another source that the route from Wolverhampton to Birmingham was, by this time, described as one continuous town. Clearly areas around Dudley were not so built up at this time that the artist could not find a country view in the vicinity of Dudley to use as the foreground for his picture. A View of Dudley by Ernest Fox, 1880. Of similar age to this sketch of Dudley by Ernest Fox. When looking at this picture, it's hard to view Dudley as an industrial town. His view is a little further round compared to that of Blackham, and it includes the ruins of the castle perched above the town. However, it draws the same artistic conclusion as Blackham, and we see Dudley almost as a country town, a view that might compare with somewhere like Ludlow. If you look closely at the town, you do, however, see some smoking chimneys. Of course, it's not hard to sympathise with the wishes of the artist to show the town in its most picturesque angle, and indeed we do know that the fields over which the view of the town were painted were not built up until at least the mid-20th century. Dudley Castle and Lime Kilns by David Cox. In a similar way, David Cox chooses a view of Dudley which only hints at its developing industrial strength. In the foreground we have open water, and to the rear the castle, but it is in a misty impression on the hill. However, the picture is misleading, for the water is in fact a canal, and next to it are two lime kilns where limestone was burned. This industrial process initially produced lime for building mortar and for improving soil fertility. By the 19th century, lime for building was in huge demand, and so there is always a hint of this, in fact, in an industrial scene. But it's still disguised as almost a country scene. View of Dudley by unknown artist. Once again, this industrial activity is hinted at in this undated view of Dudley, which I believe was done around 1815. On the one hand, you have a view of a country town with a collection of houses to the right and a straggle of better off villa residences making their way out along the road from the town. The view includes both Dudley's churches. The one at the spire is St Thomas's, which was rebuilt in 1815. The view also includes several smoking chimneys, which possibly belong to glassworks. In front of the villas to the right can also be seen a deep rift in the ground. This is where limestone has historically been mined, the same limestone that was fired in the kilns in Cox's picture. However, there is now a greater demand for this limestone because, if it was combined with iron ore, withdrew the impurities from the mix and allowed iron to be smelted with the abundant local coal. A View of Dudley from Wren's Nest by W. S. Boyd, 1900 to 1905. This view of Dudley from the early 20th century bears strong comparison with the views by Blackham and Fox, which date to 20 years earlier. However, it's an interesting comparison. It still shows a compact town, and again with the castle perched on its wooded hill. In the foreground we have Priory Hall and farmed fields, still hinting that Dudley had access to green fields even at such a recent date. However, what may be seen is that the town has spread further over the landscape. In the Fox picture you could mistake Dudley for a country town. Now that is much less easy to do. In previous pictures there was occasional reference to industrial chimneys, but now the town of Dudley positively prickles with factory chimneys. A View of Dudley by J. M. W. Turner. This watercolour is one of a number of workings of the subject dating to a visit that the artist made to Dudley in 1830. It's therefore one of the earliest pictures in this collection. However, what is interesting is that it represents a more extensive development of the industrial landscape than many of the others. Like the Cox picture, there's a canal in the foreground, but in this case it is unashamedly an artery of industry and commerce. The Dudley churches and the castle are still to be seen, but now they have in their foreground what is definitely an industrial scene. Details of the landscape are no longer shown as a country scene, but are swirled in the smoke of industry. It is not difficult to see why this picture is so different. Turner was interested in the new industrial scenes that were developing around the country, and Dudley gave him the chance to represent a view in a new and revolutionary way. Although probably the oldest picture in this selection, in some ways this is also the most modern.